Good morning. Today I'm reading from Matthew 2, verses 1 through 12, New International Version. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Thank you, David. You notice the title of the message in the bulletin is What the Bible Really Says About Epiphany. And this is the first in a sermon series that we're going to do over the next several weeks. Now, I've already told you what's going to happen next week, but following that, I'm going to spend about 5 Sundays on some passages in the Bible that are either misunderstood, misquoted, or taken out of context. And there have been several books written about this. One is called Half-Truths, which is written by Adam Hamilton, I think. There's one called The Most Misunderstood Verses in the Bible. You can Google that and you can find all kinds of lists. But there are about 5 that I want to cover. And a couple of reasons for doing this is, one, that these familiar phrases, for example, I always thought that the Bible said the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, it doesn't really say that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at those passages as we commonly understand them, and then we're going to look at what the Bible really says. And the neat thing about it is that there's a lot, if we look at the context on these passages, there's a lot of good preaching material in it. So I think we'll have some fun with that. I wanted to lighten things up a little bit because the Advent season, the messages have been pretty challenging, I think, and I wanted to do something that's a little more lighthearted for the next few weeks. So I was going to start with today what the Bible really says about Epiphany, because we have a lot of misconceptions. And we've talked about this before, but what the Bible says about the visit of the Magi or the wise men or the kings is quite different from what we're going to sing in a little bit in the song "We Three Kings of Orient Are." And I think our image of what happened is based on that song. It's also based on our nativity sets. I suspect almost every nativity set we have here in the church, and we have a lot of them, have the camels and the wise men right there. The one I have in my yard at home, if you've ever seen that one that I made years and years ago, we have our wise men right there. And the one we had out at the road that we put away on Saturday morning, I think, or whenever it was, Friday morning, that one has the camels right there. But if you read the story, based on what King Herod said, you know that the wise men probably didn't get there until about 2 years after Jesus was born. Some other misconceptions, and I'm going to cover this real quickly, and then I want to talk about these other things. So that's why I'm going through all of this now. We know that it was plural. It was wise men. It was a plural form of the original Greek word. However, we don't know how many. The reason that we say we three kings is kind of a tradition that comes out of the gifts that they brought, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there may have been 2, there may have been a dozen. I've read all of those accounts. We don't know exactly where they came from. We don't know if they were kings. We don't know exactly how long it took for them to travel to get to Bethlehem. But what we do know is that they brought these 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And they traveled a long time to give those gifts to Jesus. And the lesson that I would have eventually gotten around to at the end of a 15 or 20-minute sermon was this, that it's a challenge for us to think about the gifts that we can give to Jesus. I harp on you all the time about giving of your time, your talents, your energies, and your abilities, and your resources. But what we really need to give Jesus is in here. Give him our hearts. The best gift we can give is ourselves. Most everyone in here has done that when we accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior of our lives. We have given ourselves to him, and now the challenge is to live like that. I don't know everyone's story, and it may be that someone has never made that step, has never prayed that prayer. And if that's the case, please come and talk to me about it. And you can come during the singing of We Three Kings if you want to do that. It's such a simple prayer, but it's a powerful prayer, and that's really all that's required, is that you sing it and you believe it, and give the best gift that you have, and that's yourself, to Jesus. And so that's the sermon for today. And some of you say, well, let's do that every week. But I wanted to talk about a few things that are going on in the world, because this has been kind of an amazing week. The one I want to start with is the embassy attack in Baghdad. That happened several days ago, and fortunately there were no Americans who lost their lives in that. The result of that was that we had a retaliatory attack and took out the top general from the Iranian government. He was in Iraq, not in Iran, but he was in Iraq. And if you believe the intelligence, the government is saying that intelligence showed that this guy was behind a lot of the terrorist attacks that have happened in the last several years. That he is responsible for the killing of thousands of Americans, and that this strike to take him out was a retaliatory strike. Well, now the Iranian government is saying we're going to retaliate by attacking more U.S. sites and Israeli sites and conduct terrorism all over the world. So it's a retaliation and then more retaliation, and this kind of thing can explode into a really terrible conflict. We have dispatched 700 special forces folks to go over there, and I understand they're talking about sending another 3,000 people. I have very mixed feelings about all of this. One, the Air Force guy in me, the military guy in me says, way to go. We used air power to take out a very dangerous person. The Christian in me says, is that our foreign policy, that we assassinate people? And if we have to do that, does it mean that our foreign policy has failed, or is that the kind of foreign policy we have to have in this very dangerous world? The reason I'm telling you about this is that this could escalate very significantly, and so we need to pray that all of our forces, all of our people, wherever they are in the world, that steps are taken to protect them. So that's what I wanted to say about that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the attacks on Jews in New York City. There have been 13 attacks on Jewish folks in New York City since Christmas Eve, and there were several more in the weeks prior to that. We need to pray for our Jewish brothers and sisters. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, when God was making his first contact with then he was called Abram, later became Abraham, and Abraham is the father of Judaism. The patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then we've talked many times about how we are grafted into God's family tree when a space was left by Jews who don't believe Christ is a Messiah. And so my point is that the patriarchs of Judaism, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are on our family tree too. And we have always been allied with Israel, and we need to stay that way, in my opinion. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, God told Abraham, and it's widely interpreted that that means to Abraham and all of his descendants, in other words, Jews forever. God said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. We all, I think we need to pray that we always have an administration here in our government that is allied with Israel. If we ever break that, then I shudder to think what God might do to our nation. Every empire that has fallen, the Greek Empire fell shortly after, by shortly it may have been several years, but it was not long after they attacked Jerusalem and tried to destroy the synagogue. The Roman Empire fell not long after they invaded Israel and destroyed the temple. So it's happened in the past. Hitler, you know what he did to Jews in World War II, and of course he was destroyed. So my point is that history says that what God said in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. Many people think that the United States is such a blessed country because we have always been allied with Israel. So I just ask you to pray about that and pray that attacks on churches of all kinds, but right now it seems like there's a terrible amount of attacks on our Jewish brothers and sisters in New York City. The next thing I wanted to mention was the church shooting that happened in Texas last week. It was frightening. If you've seen any pictures of that, the person who committed that attack on that church was somebody who the pastor had helped many times. By giving this person food. This person always, or at least several times, the pastor said, would get angry because the church wasn't giving him money. And he harbored that bitterness, and he carried a gun into that church sanctuary. And when he drew it, the security team responded immediately, and that situation was over in 6 seconds. Now, you think about 6 seconds. I won't do this, but if I were to stop talking for 6 seconds, you would think it was a long time. That would seem like a long period, but when a gun battle is going on, 6 seconds goes by just like that. But the security team responded, and unfortunately one member of the security team down there lost his life, as well as one parishioner, and then the shooter was taken out too. I hate to think that in a sanctuary where we practice love and we preach love and we love each other, that we have to be concerned about somebody coming in to do harm. But it happens. It happens in churches like ours. And I am so glad that we have our volunteer security team. Every one of them is a volunteer. They make absolutely not a dime for serving as volunteers. They have stepped up to this task, and they would be willing to take a bullet for you. That's the importance of our security team. We pray that they never have to respond to an incident like that. But what I can tell you is that should it happen, they are ready. And we do a lot of things to make sure that, if at all possible, we can stop it before it happens. So I ask you to pray for the people in Texas who that church congregation is still struggling with that. And I suspect the family of the attacker is struggling as well. The last thing I wanted to mention is what I emailed you about the other evening. I was sitting on the couch on Friday evening watching the 6 o'clock news, and the news anchor, it was Fox News of Champaign, and he says, United Methodist Church splits over the LGBTQ issues. And I called Rhonda and I said, have you heard anything about this? Because we hear most of the big news about the United Methodist Church. And she hadn't either. But it was reported at 6 o'clock as if it had already happened. By 9 o'clock, they sort of got their story correct. They said that a proposal to split the church had been agreed to, and that it would be voted on in May. And that is pretty much the truth. This group that came up with this proposal is a widely diverse group. They have no official sanction from the United Methodist Church, but that doesn't mean you can't get together and prepare a resolution to be voted on at the next General Conference. But that's the key. The only body that can make changes in our structure, changes to our book of discipline, is the General Conference. And that will happen in May. If you recall, we had a specially called General Conference this past spring, 2019, to talk about issues of human sexuality. And at that specially called General Conference, the vote was to keep the wording in the Book of Discipline about same-sex marriage and about the ordination of practicing homosexuals or other members of the LGBT community as pastors. So nothing changed, basically. We knew that the efforts to change the church would happen again this coming spring in May. I had been a little surprised that there wasn't more in the news about it, and then suddenly this big thing hit the news the other day. But what you want to take away from that is that nothing has changed as of this moment. This thing, which is called a protocol on separation, it's a plan to separate the church into a progressive group and a more traditional group. But the exact details would have to be ironed out. So if this plan were adopted in May, it would be 1 to 3 years before we would know what the structure of all of that would be. And so what I want you to take away from this is simply that the United Methodist Church is still the United Methodist Church. And if people say, hey, I heard your church split, you can tell them, no, that has not happened. Nothing will happen until May when these plans are discussed and debated. If you have questions about that, please see me after church and I'll give you the best information I can. And as we get closer to General Conference 2020, I'll give you more information as it comes available to me. So thank you for letting me get those things off my chest this morning and hopefully answer some of the questions that you have. The big thing is we live in a very dangerous world and a changing world. And as we've seen in our community, there is continuous pressure on us Christians to keep our mouths shut and keep out of sight. And there's so many groups that would love for that to happen, but we need to stand up for who we are and who we believe. But we also need to pray for our world, our nation, and all of our leaders. One more thing, let me tell you quickly, and I just saw this morning. It absolutely disgusted me, and that was the magazine Hustler. Hustler magazine. I wasn't reading Hustler magazine. I promise you. I wasn't reading. That came out bad. I wasn't reading Hustler magazine, but apparently Hustler magazine sent Christmas cards to some of their subscribers, or a lot of their subscribers, that depicted Donald Trump in a pool of blood. In other words, having been assassinated. I don't care if you hate Donald Trump or hate what he stands for, or you hate the fact that he was elected, or whether you love him, and we're in all those spectrum in between. That crosses the line. But it shows the very dangerous nature of the discussion in America. And so I just ask you to pray about those kinds of things too. The Bible makes clear that we are to pray for our leaders, whether we love them, whether we hate the fact that they're our leader or not, we are still supposed to pray for them. And I hope that somebody's held accountable for publishing something that's absolutely disgusting like that. Okay, and don't go telling people the pastor's been reading Penthouse. Oh, good. There's another.